Today's notes, we're going to talk about congruent triangles. So on my board, the word congruent is always under part equals part. So today, most of our stuff is going to be under part equals part. So congruent figures are figures that are the same size and shape. So you can have a triangle with a perimeter of 10, and you can have a square with a perimeter of 10, but that doesn't make them congruent. They have to be the same shape. And corresponding parts, remember when we talked about corresponding angles? That's, I told you to think about cars. Driver's seat goes with driver's seat, passenger seat goes with passenger seat. Well, with congruent triangles, think of it the same way. This angle goes with this angle. So corresponding parts are angles and sides of a triangle that is congruent or that matches up with to another triangle's angles and sides. For our first example, write a congruent statement for the triangles. Identify all parts of congruent corresponding parts. Alright, so this is what a congruent statement is. Is you just match up all the corresponding parts. So you're pretty much saying the triangle on the left is congruent to the triangle on the right. But you have to match up all the angles and sides. So, for example, let's look at this triangle over here. And we can start with whichever letter we want. I'll just go out alphabetically. So I'll start with letter A. So angle A, then B, then C. So that's called triangle ABC. And I'll match it up with the triangle on the right, but I have to go the same order. So since I started with this angle, angle A, I have to start off with the corresponding part to it. So the corresponding part to it would be this angle because it's also 90. So my next triangle will be F. And then I went with B, and that corresponds to this one here because it has one arc. Those arcs are matching. G, and now H, because H has two arcs and it corresponds to C. So that is a congruent statement, and you could have gone with whichever order you wanted. You could have said triangle CBA, and then you would say is congruent to triangle HGF. So the order of the first one doesn't matter. What matters is that the second one has to match up. So let's identify all the corresponding parts. So I'll just make a table, and all I'm doing is just matching up everything. So let's start with angles first, and then we'll do sides. So all we do is the same thing. So we're going to say angle A is congruent to, and you just match the corresponding part. And we knew that A matches up with F because they're both 90 degrees. And I'll go alphabetically again. Angle B is congruent to, and since we already wrote up the statement, I mean, I can just copy from there. And then angle C is congruent to angle H. I'll do the same thing with sides. Just don't forget that sides have, instead of one letter, it has two letters. So this side would be side AC. So AC is congruent to, and I know A corresponds to F, and then C corresponds to H. And again, the order of the first one doesn't matter. The order of the second one does. So you can use your actual congruency statement since you already matched it up here. Or you can use your picture. AC ends up matching up with FH. So now pick a different side. We can pick side AB this time. So AB is congruent to FG. And now the last side with these 3 tick marks, BC, it's congruent to GH. And that's it. So again, congruency statement, you're just matching up the triangle with the other triangle. Order does matter on the second one. And then corresponding parts, match up the angles, then match up the sides. Alright, and for triangles to be congruent, all angles have to be congruent to each other, and you have to know all sides have to be congruent to each other. So that leads us into our next example. Are these triangles congruent, and how do we know? So let's see. Do the corresponding parts match up? And if they do, then we'll write a congruency statement. So we can start with sides. Let's just start with sides for fun. So ST, 1 tick mark, matches up with this 1 tick mark. All right, we're good. I'm going to actually highlight it. That matches up with that. TR matches up with KJ. And then SR, 3 tick marks, matches up with the 3 tick marks over here. All right, let's see if the angles are matching up. And I don't know if you already see an issue, but I see an issue right now. So for example, if you look at side ST, you see how angle S has 3 arcs and angle T has 2 arcs. So if I go over to this side, that has 1 arc and that has 3 arcs. So things aren't really matching up. Like, yes, the sides are measuring the same, but because the corresponding parts are not in the corresponding places, I can't say that the triangles are congruent. So I will say not congruent because parts are not corresponding. And then you can point out the parts. And yeah, you can highlight that we know there's 1 tick mark, but angles aren't matching up. All right, next question. Are the triangles congruent? Before we do that, I don't know if you see it, but I see vertical angles here. Remember angles that form an X and they're across from each other? And I see it right here. So I'm going to add 3 arcs to it. 1, 2, 3, and then match it up with the other one. 1, 2, 3. And the reason why I did 3 arcs is because the 1 arc was already taken up, the 2 arcs is already taken up, so the next one has to be 3. All right, so let's see if the parts are matching up. So the 1 tick mark side, GD, and G has 2 arcs, D has 1 arc. That matches up with this side, and it looks good so far. 1 tick mark, D goes with H, and then F goes with G. 2 tick marks, D, E. 1 arc and 3 arcs. 1 arc and 3 arcs. And it has 2 tick marks. So we're good. And FE goes with GE. And the corresponding parts are in the corresponding places. So this is matching up everywhere. So these are congruent. So now we got to write a congruency statement. So we'll start with triangle on the left. Triangle, and you can go with whatever order you want. I'm just going to say DEG is congruent to triangle. If I start with D, 1 arc, that matches 1 arc here. So H. E goes with E. E, and then G goes with F. Next one, are the triangles below congruent, and how do you know? So all I know is that B is congruent to E, A is congruent to D. Since all triangles add up to 180, if those two angles match, then it must make sense for this third angle to match each other. So all angles are congruent to each other. The only problem is I don't know if the sides are congruent to each other. There's no tick marks to match them up. And you could say, well, since the angles are congruent, they must be the same size. But I'll give you an example. If we're talking about a square, I know all squares have 90-degree angles on the corners, but you can have a different size square and it still also have the same 90-degree angles, but these are obviously not congruent. They're different sizes. So you can't assume triangles are congruent just because they have congruent angles. So are these congruent? These are not congruent. All right, so now let's do some math. So we are going to do the same thing. We're going to match up the corresponding parts, and that way we can figure out the unknown variable. So for example, right now it looks like we're only looking at angles, so that's all we'll deal with. I know angle R corresponds to angle V. So if angle R is 120, then angle V is 120. And then this W matches up with this W, but the issue is I'm trying to solve for Y. So maybe you already know how to go about this, but here's one way of doing it. If I can figure out what W is, I can do part equals part with these two because they are congruent. So let's figure out this piece. How can I figure out the missing angle of this triangle? And we did this yesterday. I know all triangles add up to 180. So let's figure out the missing angle. So 120 plus 20. 180 minus 140, and we'll get our missing angle, which is 40 degrees. All right, so now that these two match up, I'm going to do part equals part. So I got y equals 19. And that's it. There's no more other variables. Given triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, find the missing values. Anytime you're given a congruency statement, always follow it and match up your parts. So if you look at your picture, my picture is all about angles. There's no side measures. So I'm just going to match up the angles. So here you go. A matches up with D. So I'm put one arc, one arc. B matches up with E. 2 arcs, 2 arcs. And then C with F. 3 arcs, 3 arcs. So now I can match up my angles. Any that I can match them up with. So B and E are both 42 degrees. A and D match. So I can do part equals part with those. So I'll do that real quick. And I got 16. And now for angle C. So if I can figure out what angle F is, then I can do part equals part with angle C. So let's figure that out. So if I know A is 87, then I know D is 87. So that's really easy to find this missing angle. So let me do that real quick. 82, oh, not 82, 42. And 180. So we get 51 degrees. And now part equals part. 17. Alright, so let's match up all the parts. Angle A is 87. And I know A and D are congruent to each other, so D is also 87. B is 42. E is 42. And then since F is 51, then I know C is 51. So with all of these examples, you could have gone other ways to figure out the missing values and missing pieces. So if you feel like you need to pause this video just to kind of let your brain look at this and understand this, if it went too fast, let me know. But just think of these as little puzzles. You get little hints and pieces of your puzzle, and then you end up filling out the rest. So I'm going to move on to the next example. Again, pause the video if you need a second to understand what just happened. Alright, again we have another congruency statement. So always pay attention to it to match up the parts. So that's what I'm going to do. But look at the numbers. The numbers are now on the outside. So we know we're talking about sides. So I'm going to match up the sides. XP corresponds to DN. So 1 tick mark. PS, 2 tick marks, matches up with NF, 2 tick marks. And then final side matches with the final side. And it says find the values of X and Y. So where's X? X is right here. 3 tick marks matches with 3 tick marks. So like I said before, pretty much everything today is part equals part. Just do part equals part with the things that match. So make sure you match and correspond the parts first, and then everything will come together all easily. And same thing with Y, match up the part. So Y is here, 1 tick mark, matches with 1 tick mark. And that's it. That one was pretty easy. Let's do another one. Again, really important when we find our congruency statement. This time we don't have a picture, so it is kind of nice when that happens, because that means you draw your own picture. So I'm going to draw 2 triangles. And then since I'm drawing the triangles, I'm not going to make it crazy where everything's out of order like this. I'm going to make them match up. So triangle BAT, and remember the first triangle, the order of it doesn't matter. What matters is that second triangle has to match up that order. So since I started with B at the top, I'm going to start with D at the top for the next triangle. And then put A to the right, so O and G. Because once you do that, you already start matching up the parts. Notice how everything's about angles. So that means write all these numbers on the inside because we're talking about angles. And plus, we already know what angles match with what. That matches with that one, this with this, and this with this. And now write in what we know. So angle B is 14. Angle G is 29. O is 10x plus 7. And it says find x. There's two ways you can go about this. I'll show you the first way and then I'll discuss the second way. So I know T and G match. So this is also 29. And I said before, whatever matches, we can do part equals part. So if I can figure out what angle A is, then I can move on to part equals part. So let me do that real quick. Find the missing angle of a triangle. We know triangles add up to 180. So 14 plus 29. So this is 137. And now I can do part equals part. The other way you could have done this is, well, we know B is 14, so D is also 14. And then we know triangles add up to 180, so you could have done this as part plus part plus part equals 180 to solve for x, and you should get 13 as well. So it doesn't matter which way you're thinking about it, as long as you're following theorems, you're following things that match. So if you end up doing part equals part, you would have gotten also 13. All right, last one. If you want to try this one on your own, you can pause it. All right, so same thing. Make sure when you write in your first triangle, the second triangle writes in the same order. So C-O-W, P-I, last letter I put on the left. And it looks like everything's about sides this time, so all these numbers are written on the outside. And if I want to, I can already match up my parts. So all these numbers again are on the outside. So C-O, C-W, I-G, and it is just asking for x, and x is right here. And PG corresponds to CW. Is 35 divided by 7, and we get the answer of 5. Alright, again, so to recap, congruent figures are figures that are the same size and same shape, and then we have to make sure everything corresponds to each part. So we talked about congruency statements, which you pretty much just say triangle ABC is congruent to triangle FGH, and we make sure that all our parts are corresponding. We talked about how pretty much since everything is congruent to everything, we are doing part equals part over and over and over again. all we got to make sure is that whatever we do part equals part to, it has to be parts that match. So one tick mark with one tick mark, one arc with one arc, three arcs with three arcs, things that match. All right, so your assignment is pretty much the same thing. It's only 7 questions. I'll explain a little bit the first one. This first question, you're just writing congruency statements. So whatever order was the first triangle, make sure the other triangle is corresponding to it. So like I'll do this first one with you. Triangle TPW is congruent to triangle. So T has 2 arcs, G has 2 arcs, P has 1 arc, H has 1 arc, and then D. And then you just do that with these 2. For the next ones, notice how they all have equal signs. That means your answer needs to be in numbers. So what I would do is, remember, if they give you a congruency statement, pay attention to it. So I would match up the arcs already and all the angles. So, because this is talking about angles and sides, so I need to put my congruent arcs and my tick marks on our picture. So I'll do this one, I'll match it up for you, and then everything else y'all attempt it on your own. The whole back page is part equals part. If you are watching this video, I will let you skip number 6. And then try to attempt everything else, and I'll address any questions that you may have. But for right now, let me just match these up and then I'll pause the video. B goes with Z, Y goes with C, and M goes with R. And that's it. So make sure all your answers are in numbers. These should all be number answers.